Welcome back. So in the last part, we looked at these two events here, and they didn't break quite like I thought they would, but there is another good reason that I didn't talk about from before, that you actually want to make it so your events go one space ahead. And I also mentioned earlier that I was going to show the way to do these events manually. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click on this first event that we made that's points, in the incorrect way, where you're not going one square ahead. I'm just going to right click on it and then go down here to delete and go ahead and delete that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on map number 2 because we did the same thing there. So just click there, right click, and go to delete. And then you can see when the gray square goes away, then that's how you can tell there's no event there anymore. So we're going to go ahead and just show the manual way really quick for how to make one of these events, and then we'll talk about the event editor screen and stuff too. So if you have one of the older versions of RPG Maker, like XP or 2003 or something like that, this is how you actually have to do this, because they don't have this quick event creation option, to make the transfer events. So we're going to just go ahead and right click this square, and then we want to go to new. And now here we are in the event editor, and we can see that it's ID 001. So the reason that it did that is because we had event number 1, but then we deleted it, and then so there was no event number 1 again at that point. So it creates a new one, and it just kind of goes in sequential order. So like whatever the lowest number is that it can create an ID for on that map, it will. So that's why, even though this is technically our third event on here, it replaced the 001 that we deleted. So I didn't talk about this screen very much, but I'll go over a little bit more about how this works. So here where it says name, you can actually put in a name here, and it says name of the event. So by default it just does EV and then the ID number, and that's fine. You don't ever really have to change it if you don't want. But you can, so you could call this, and it might be helpful for you to do that if you want to get in the habit of naming them something related to what they are. So it could be like transfer to map 002 or something like that, whatever you want to call it. And then that will actually show up. I'll just hit OK really quick, and then I'll show you. When you have it click, whoops, I didn't mean to double click, go back. When you have it selected, it actually shows up down here. It's event ID 001, and then the name after that. This is transfer to map 002. So you can do that to kind of help you remember what what you're doing with that event, or you can name it after a character. If it's a character walking around, you can say character with orange hair if you're talking about the main character, or whatever you want to do. But you don't have to. Again, you can just leave it as EV and then the ID number. Notes are here that you can just, it says text area where you can freely add notes. So if you have some kind of note that you need to leave for yourself about the event in general, you can do that. I know there are some plugins that actually make use of this box for some purpose, but you don't have that too often. But there's an easier way to, or maybe not an easier way, but there's a more useful way to leave yourself notes inside of an event that we can look at later. Then you don't just have to use this one little tiny box and that's it. So the main things we'll want to do for a transfer event here. Now you can see here there's these conditions, and it says it specifies conditions for which the event appears on the map. If no conditions are specified, the event appears unconditionally. That's kind of obvious, but okay. A higher numbered page has a higher priority. So right now, this is page 1. This is what this 1 tab is. So you can add multiple pages to your events and things like that, and we'll look at that. Probably look at that for sure, like with dialogue and things like that as we get further in. But this button here, new event page, is how you'll create that. So your different conditions, we can have them work by switches and variables and self-switch. Whether or not the party has an item in their possession, or and we'll go through all these in more detail later on as they're more applicable. But you can set an image for the event, but we don't need one for this type of event because we don't want anything to show up on the map where they can walk. We just want it to, be invisible, and then when they step there, then it transfers them. So here, the autonomous movement. This is if you want the map to move, or not the map, sorry, the event to move around on the map. You can change this from fixed to these other types, and it says the types of autonomous movement are fixed, which means it does not move from the position in which it was placed, which is what we want in this case. Random moves passable tiles around freely, and we'll talk about, like I said, the passability later. But what that does, it just kind of moves in a random way. So approach moves towards the current location of the player, and then if you do custom, then you can use this root box here, and it will that's where if you really want to fine tune the movement of a certain event, you can have it walk and move in a specific way, and that's what you do with that. And then here we can change the speed and the frequency at which the event moves around. We don't need that for right now for this part. And then here, options. Now, by default, this walking option is checked, and it says it turns on the animation when the character is moving. So if you had a picture and they were moving around, it would animate, the image based on the, say it was a character or something that was this event, and you would want that to stay checked. In this case, it's not going to do anything because we're not even going to have it move. Same with these other options here. We'll talk about them later when we're, doing something more applicable, but the main things we want to look at for this type of event are right here, the priority box and the trigger box. So let's see what it says for the priority tooltip. It says display priority of the event. However, when the image is a tile and the priority is below characters, the tile set settings will be used. Okay, well, that's good to know. I'm not even sure that I even knew that, honestly. I haven't used it for that purpose very much, but the idea here, below characters, same as characters, and above characters. So for this type of event, we want it to be below characters because that means that the player can walk over it and, walk onto it, which is what we want. In this case, if you did something that's same as characters, then you can think about it like the rock or, the tree trunk or whatever, where the player will not be able to step on that spot. So they would be blocked off by this event. That's one way you can do it, but for these, I just usually prefer using below so they can walk on the space. Either way, you can do it. You can make it, work with each approach, however you want to do it there. But and then the other option above characters, it's for things that you would want to show up, above a character, but still have them be able to move there. So if you remember on the tree example, if you go on the two tiles at the back of it, the top of the tree will appear above the characters, and they can walk behind it. It'll be that kind of a situation for the event. So for this, we want to just leave it at below characters. Now the trigger is the important one to change here for this type of event. Looks like the tooltip goes, there we go. I was going to say the tooltip went off the screen a little bit there. It says the condition to start the event is what the trigger is. So by default, it's the action button, which means once the player presses a button, the main action button, that is what will cause the event to start. So we don't want that in this case, because then what would happen with that is the player would have to walk over onto the space and then press a button to move to the map. And we just want it to be able to walk onto the space and then transfer them automatically. So for that, we want the player touch option. This is in addition to the above, starts when the player touches the event. So that's what we want to use for this. There's other options, event touch, which works similarly, but it's when the event touches the player. So if you wanted something, you would use that for an event that moves around. and if they bumped into the player, then the event would trigger. Auto run starts when the event appears. So auto run is something you use like to have an event run right from the start, like when the player first appears on the map. That's what you'd use for auto run. And parallel, it says run cyclically while the event is present. So a parallel trigger, we'll get into that later probably, but the main thing with that is to remember with that is that it runs and the player can still do whatever they're doing. With the auto run, it kind of like takes over and right from the start, and then that's how you could do like maybe a cutscene or something where the player isn't necessarily in control of the character for a little bit or whatever. But parallels, they'll parallel trigger events will continue to run alongside whatever the player's doing. So so you want to be a little bit more careful with those. Anyway, so we'll talk about all that later. It's kind of a lot to take in right now. So, but the main takeaway here is that we want to change this from action button by clicking on it to player touch in this case, because we just want it so when the player walks here, they're gonna transfer over to where we want. Now we could replicate it just like the quick event transfers. So to do that, we'll just go here, and the contents is where the bulk of whatever actions are going to be taking place. This is where you'll end up putting them. It says event commands to be run for this event. Right click to open the pop-up menu. So that's what we'll do. We'll right click, and we want to just go to new, and that will bring up this big old long list of event commands. You'll get really used to seeing these screens because you're going to be in here all the time doing different event commands. And they're broken up into categories that usually make sense, but not always. And there's all sorts of stuff in here. We'll be using quite a few over the course of making a game here. But for now, if you remember back to what the event looked like, it played a sound effect and then it transferred the player. So we need to find those two things, and then we have these two other tabs up here with more things that you can check out. So we've got movement options, options related to the player's character, options related to pictures. So here we have an audio and video section. So we wanted to do a sound effect. So we want to go down here to play SE, short for sound effect, plays the specified SE. I don't know why they didn't just say sound effect to make that a little more clear, but that's alright. So we want to play a sound effect, and if I remember correctly, it was move 1, I think. So let's scroll down here till we get to move 1. It's alphabetical, so it's easy to find. Okay, and then we can hit play to test it if we want. And yeah, that's the default sound. So okay, and we'll just hit OK. And now we can see this first line here, that's an instruction for this. When this event triggers, it will do this. So it'll play a sound effect. Now, in addition to that, we want it to move our character to the other map. So we'll go back and right-click again underneath that, and it does the things from the instructions here from the top down. So if you wanted something to happen before the sound effect, you can click back on this first spot, right click again and do new, and it will actually put whatever you have it do in front of that. Otherwise you want to go down to this next one because it'll be the second thing to do. So first it'll play the sound, then we want it to move. So we'll just right click the blank spot and do new. And then here on the second page you can see, or second tab, you can see there's a movement option, and the first one is transfer player, and that's what we want to do. So we'll click that. And then we see this familiar screen again where we saw before when we were editing the location. So we want to do direct designation. And we are starting on map 1. And you can see by default it's up here way in the corner. But that's not what we want. We want it to take us to map 2. And before we had it go to here, but we actually do want to go to one space ahead. And you want to get in the habit of that for, I know I said before that it was only applicable to the older RPG makers, but really you want to do it even in the newer ones. It's just a good practice, and I'll explain a little bit more why that is here in just a second. So we want to click one ahead of it and hit OK. And then direction is retain, and that's fine. And we're going to keep the fade to black, actually, because that's how it is by default. So we'll hit OK. And now that's all we need to do for this event. So we can go ahead and hit OK. And now we have our transfer event that's pretty much the same as our quick transfer event would have been. So you can see it takes quite a bit more time to do it manually, but in the older versions, especially the earlier ones of RPG Maker, this is how you do it. You have to do that. But once you have one, we can do what we did again, with the first part, where you can right click on it and do copy and then paste it. So even if you had 10 squares or tiles on your map where you wanted to move, you really only have to make the first one, and then you can paste in copies of it, and then all you have to change is you go back in and change the exact coordinates if you want it to line up perfectly, like this square to that square, this square to that square. You would just change the coordinates again. So it's not crazy amount of work, but and it really doesn't change that much either when you think about it, because even if you started with the quick event creation, you're still probably going to be wanting to do copy and paste just to speed things up. So but anyway, so that's how you manually make one. Now I'm actually going to go back in here and edit this one, because I do want to change the fade that we did from none before back to just the default black. So I'm just going to hit space with this highlighted, and that will just open the edit mode. That's a shortcut. And then change the fade here back to black and hit OK. So now we just need to make our second event here, and I'm actually just going to copy this one. So keyboard shortcut you can use for copy is hold Control and press the C button. So that's what I'm going to do. Instead of right clicking, I'm holding Control on the keyboard, press C, and then likewise for paste, the shortcut is Control V. So, and you can do it in the right click menu. Either way works. You can actually use these buttons up here too. You can see the paste one is it's not grayed out like these others, because it means you can use it. So actually we'll just do that. You can just show you how that works. You can click paste, and there you go. So if you wanted to cut, the difference between cut and copy is cut gets rid of that one that it's there, and copy just makes a copy of it without getting rid of it. So cut is more useful. You can think of it like move, because that's really, it says removes and copies the selection to the clipboard. So so if you wanted to have this event here and you're like, oh, I really wanted it over here, actually, an easy way to do that is just to use cut and then paste it right back in here. Versus if you wanted one here and also one here, then you would use copy, and that leaves this one here. So let me just go back in really quick and edit this. So we have to, for this one, we have to change the location too, because it's pointed down here. So we wanted a destination, and we want to put it here, one in front of our other transfer event. And hit OK. And then change the fade to black. And hit OK again. OK one more time. And then the only other change, I'm going to go back in and double click. And then just right click and go to edit. And change this fade back to black. So now they're all fade to black, because that's the default way, and I personally think it looks a little nicer than just no fade, but that's up to you how you want to do it. Alright, so now that we've got that all fixed up, let's go ahead and play test, and we'll save the changes we made. If you ever are playing around with something, like maybe you're trying to do something and you've made some edits but you don't like them, you can just choose no, and it will still let you play test. But all the changes that you've made since the last time you saved are not going to persist, so you got to be careful with that. Most of the time you're probably going to want to use yes if you see this prompt. The better thing to even do than that is just to get in the habit of using the save button up here regularly to save whatever you've done. So, and then cancel will just take you right back to the map screen, and it won't play test, and it won't save or anything for you. So but we'll just do yes, because we want to save those changes we made. And we're gonna go right back in here really quick and test our transfer events. So now they should both be working to where they put you one square in front, just like this one did. Okay, so there they are. And now this one should be pretty much identical. And now we're one space ahead of where we wanted to be over here. And there we go. So now the reason, now it's working how it should. The reason that I said, even for the newer ones where you would want to do one space ahead, is because it's more of a design issue. If you look back in the previous video, you'll notice when we had it to where it transferred the player right here, if you click on this spot again, nothing happens. So the nice part about being one ahead is that if the player wants to immediately go back to the previous spot where they were, all they have to do is click back and it works. But before, if they click back, it wouldn't work, so you'd have to click one square forward and then one square back, and it's kind of a, it's not a very good design thing. Like, it should be easier for the player to just go, oh, I want to go left, and then they can go left, instead of having to go, oh, I want to go to the right, well, first I have to go to the left and then back to the right, and then, because that's how it worked before. So just my recommendation would be really just get used to doing transfers and doors and things like that one tile ahead of where the actual event is that triggers it, and then it makes it pretty seamless and intuitive.